Friends, thank you so much for joining us for a really insightful topic on the institution of the hands of the cause of God. This talk is going to be given by our lovely Miss Ann Gorski. The last surviving hand of the cause of God was Dr. Ali Muhammad Varga, who passed away in 2007. As a result of his passing and the last hand of the cause of God, today most of the work is carried on by counselors and auxiliary board members. So it's going to be a very wonderful talk. So please save your questions for the end. And without further ado, Marianne.
Thank you so much. It's nice to see the lovely faces from previous. This talk I gave in my home for my own local community, and it was very well received. It encouraged a lot of thought, looking at the history surrounding the institution of the hands of the cause of God. It is not uh, as important to just look at names and dates. You have to look at the circumstances around it. So when you look at the institution of the hands of the cause of God, you're going to wind up with lots of papers with subsidiary subjects. So I hope I can keep the papers around me and the books around me separate and in chronological order. So bear with me. The first thing I'd like to say is that we're very lucky to have this book, which was done by the hands of the cause of God, Rahia Khanum, with the help of other hands. This is a complete history, word by word, of the 6 years where the custodians of the cause of Baha'u'llah was handled by the hands of the cause of God after the passing of Shoghi Effendi. Let me begin by saying that Baha'u'llah in his lifetime appointed 4 hands of the cause of God. Abdu'l-Baha also considered 4 outstanding believers as hands of the cause of God during his ministry. Shoghi Effendi appointed 10 posthumously during his ministry. All of them passed away before the institution, let's say, of the hands of the cause of God was established. So how was it established? It had to do with the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha, which is in 3 parts covering 7 years, 1901 to 1908. So there are no hands of the cause living. There are no hands of the cause appointed. And yet, in the will and testament of Baha'u'llah, you will see the hands of the cause of God mentioned regularly. On page 11 is the first. Page 11 is my original copy, the copy that looks like this. Page 11 is the first mention. What's interesting is in that paragraph where it's mentioned, Shoghi Effendi, Abdu'l-Baha says the same thing twice. Oh, my loving friends, after the passing of this wrong one, the 2 families, the Afsan and the Afnan, the families of Baha'u'llah and the Bab, and the hands of the cause of God should turn to Shoghi Effendi. And then a few sentences later, he repeats these same families and the hands of the cause of God. Ones must turn to Shoghi Effendi. Interesting that he says the same thing within a few sentences apart. Then in the will and testament are the duties of the hands of the cause. On that same page, you will see Abdu'l-Baha saying, my object is to show that the hands of the cause of God must be ever watchful, and as soon as they find someone opposing or protesting the guardian nip it in the bud. So that's their mandate for the protection side of their duties. Later on, the obligations of the hands of the cause of God are to diffuse the divine fragrances, to edify the souls of men, to promote learning. That's the part of their mandate to proclamation of the cause. So he's now saying, we've got the hands of the cause of God. They must turn to Shoghi Effendi, who has been appointed the guardian of the cause. And now you've got protection and proclamation. The body of the hands of the cause, of course, are under the direction of the guardian of the cause. Now, during 1901 and 1908, Shoghi Effendi was 4 to 10 or 11 years old. Should Abdul Baha in those dangerous years have been found it necessary to implement the will and testament, it would have been a whole series of problems and dangers that would fall upon Shoghi Effendi, considering how the family members were not faithful, and there weren't that many Western believers, of course. The faith hadn't gone to the West. So for 30 years, we had the will and testament that was read at Abdul Baha's passing, 1921, until the first contingents of the institution of the Hands of the Cause of God, which began in 1951. So for 30 years of the will and testament, Shoghi Effendi didn't even consider, at least writing messages to the Baha'is, that he was contemplating contingencies of the Hands of the Cause of God. So in 1951, Shoghi Effendi did 2 things. Early in that year, he established and appointed the International Baha'i Council. To begin with, it was made up of eight believers. The liaison between the council and the guardian was, of course, Ahmad Baha Rahia Khanum. He appointed Mason Remy as the president of the council, which led to problems later on. Amelia Collins was the vice president, Leroy Iowa secretary general, and then Hugo Giacari, member at large. Jessie Revelle was the treasurer. Her sister Ethel Revelle was the Western assistant treasurer secretary, and Lakfullah Akim was the Eastern assistant secretary. You will see of those members appointed by Shoghi Effendi for the appointed International Baha'i Council, the names of future Hands of the Cause of God. They were not Hand of the Cause of God when they were appointed to the International Baha'i Council. In 1955, Sylvia Iowis was added to that first appointment. You will notice that there are 5 women, which means that women on the institutions are not on the institutions, are not because they don't have the capacity. Now, the second thing Shoghi Effendi did in 1991 was at the end of the year when he appointed the first contingents of Hands of the Cause of God. So here we have some of them on both the Hands of the Cause of God institution, and the International Baha'i Council institution. So this book up front is a treasure of naming all the Hands of the Cause of God appointed by Shoghi Effendi posthumously by the central figures in Shoghi Effendi when they passed away. It is just, and that's just the beginning of this wonderful book. So, of the International Baha'i Councils, we have Leroy Iolas, Hugo Giaccheri, Amelia Collins, Mason Remy, Lakfullah Hakim, not yet. William Sutherland Maxwell, the father of Shoghi Effendi's wife, Amata Baha Rahia Khanum, was appointed in that first contingency. Mind you, this was December 24th, 1951. 3 months later, March the 22nd, 1952, Sutherland Maxwell passed away. There were 5 Hands of the Cause of God who were appointed separately. Sutherland Maxwell died on March the 25th. On March the 26th, Shoghi Effendi said the mantle of the Hand of the Cause of God has fallen on the shoulders of his daughter. The same thing occurred with the Hand of the Cause of this contingency, Varga. But it was about 3 days later that Shoghi Effendi appointed separately Ali Mohammed Farga, who Neda told us was the last living Hand of the Cause of God. 2 months later, mind you, Shoghi Effendi in December of 1951 appoints 12 Hands of the Cause of God. 2 months later, right away, he appoints the second contingency of 7 Hands of the Cause of God. I have a note here. Then in 1954, he appoints the third contingency of 8. Between that year and the other contingency in 1954, the Guardian asked the Hands to appoint auxiliary board members to help in their work. The priceless pearl, Rahia Khanum, says, so disastrous is the effect of covenant breaking on the cause that one of the last acts of Shoghi Effendi's ministry was to inform the Hands of the Cause of God that they should appoint a second group of auxiliary board members for the purpose of protecting the faith. So in 54, there were a need for newly formed auxiliary board members. For their continental hands, what does it mean that Shoghi Effendi says appoint auxiliary board members to the continental Hands of the Cause of God? Because some of the Hands of the Cause of God voted, volunteered, elected to serve in the Holy Land, or other duties serving the Guardian. So those who were out in the field, shall we say, scattered around the world in continents, Shoghi Effendi says those have to have more auxiliary board members for the protection of the cause. So they have also been divided into proclamation and protection. So we have this third contingent in October 1957. This is just days before Shoghi Effendi passed away. He appointed 8 more hands of the cause of God. All right, I'm trying to keep my notes here. The other individual appointments by Shoghi Effendi, besides Varga and Rahia Khanum, was Mr. Kase, Paul Haney, and Agnes Alexandria. All right. This book, The Ministry of the Custodian, is actually almost a day-by-day report of what the Hands of the Cause of God did in keeping the faith together. For example, they raised the number of National Spiritual Assembly over those years so that when it came time to elect the Universal House of Justice, they had enough national representation to call for the election of the Universal House of Justice. One of the interesting things I found out in this book is that the first International Baha'i Council for the election of the Universal House of Justice was to take place in Baghdad, marking the site where Baha'u'llah made his declaration. But because of the political atmosphere of the Middle East, and particularly Iraq, the Hands of the Cause had to announce the sad news that it would not be held in Baghdad, and then added the good news was that it was going to be held in London, where the friends would be able to visit the threshold of the gravesite of the beloved guardian. They tempered news so brilliantly. There's hundreds of letters in this book where the Hands of the Cause kept the Baha'i world abreast of how it was progressing in promoting the faith of Baha'u'llah, the administration that was in effect at that time, which was Baha'i administration. You may remember from different classes that there's an evolution. There's the Baha'i administration. We're in the administrative order. And then there will be, in the future, the Baha'i World Commonwealth and other institutions gathering the world together. So, in the first election of the Universal House of Justice, before we could do that, the Hands of the Cause called for an election of the an election of the International Baha'i Council. Pardon me while I go for my notes, because these are all these papers and I'm trying to keep it straight. Oh, I see people. Oh, that's wonderful. Hello, y'all. Okay, here it is, folks. In 1961, the Hands of the Cause of God called for the election of the International Baha'i Council. Now, mind you, this institution, Shoghi Effendi said, would have to take place before the election of the permanent Universal House of Justice. So remember, Shoghi Effendi at the beginning of 1951, the end of 1951, beginning of 1951, appointed the International Baha'i Council. So now we have the elected International Baha'i Council 10 years later. Ali Jesse Revell received the highest number of votes. Certainly, that tells us that the national assemblies in existence then voted women on the House of Justice. Jessie got the highest number of votes. Ali Nachavani, Lakfola Hakim, Ethel Revell, Charles Wolcott, Sylvia Iosis, Mildred Mataheta, Ian Semple, and Bor Cavalin. Of the 5 members elected to the first Universal House of Justice, they were elected to this International Baha'i Council. Lakfola Hakim was one who was both on the appointed and the elected, and then the Universal House of Justice. Lakfola Hakim is the only only member of the first Universal House of Justice that I did not serve with. I served with the other 8. Lakfola Hakim passed away just a few months before I showed up at the World Center in 1968. He was replaced in 1968 by Dr. David Rue. All right. Now, there's a part of history that I skipped over, and it's very important. And it has to do with the protection of the faith. Instantly upon the passing of Shoghi Effendi, when you read The Priceless Pearl, you will read where Shoghi Effendi suddenly passed away. So many responsibilities fell on the shoulders of Rhea Khanum. One of them uppermost in her mind was the protection of the faith in Haifa. So she contacted, I believe Leroy Ioas was in Haifa, because he worked very closely with the paperwork of Shoghi Effendi, and told the hands in the Holy Land to lock and seal the private rooms of the Shoghi Effendi, that everything should be sealed and protected and watched. Somebody actually slept outside the door so that everything of his papers would be protected. So in this book, you will read Shoghi Effendi died on November the 4th. The funeral was held a few days later. This is November the 15th. The hands of the cause arrived in what was Lida Airport in Israel at 10:50 a.m. She even gives the time. She, Mr. Remy, Mrs. Collins, Dr. Giocari, and Mr. Ioas arrived back in Haifa. So they're writing a letter signed by these hands of the cause of God that they have returned to the Holy Land. And these secured and sealed keys were in an envelope that was open, and they proceeded to go to the apartment of Shoghi Effendi and Rhea Khanum at 11:10 a.m. Okay, then on November the 19th, 4 days later, they make an official statement. This morning, immediately after 9 a.m., we, the 5 hands of the cause, assigned to serve the World Center, and she names them. They found the seals placed on the safe were intact and untouched. The seals containing the keys were intact and untouched. The sealed desk was untouched. This examination, this protection, led to the announcement that the custodians, the hands of the cause, could not find a will and could not appoint a second guardian. I said that Shoghi Effendi appointing Mason Remy as president of the appointed International Baha'i Council would lead to problems because Shoghi Effendi gave him that title. A few years later is when he said that Shoghi Effendi was really appointed him the second guardian, and yet his signature is on these official statements of the hands of the cause of God that there were no ways that they could appoint a second guardian. So Mason Remy's claim was refuted by himself when the five hands of the cause of God in the Holy Land examined the safe and the papers and the apartment of the guardian of the faith. When the House of Justice was elected, one of the things they learned was statements that the duties of the hands of the cause of God must extend into the future. But they knew that they had no authority to appoint hands of the cause of God. The duties of the hands of the cause of God must extend into the future. And that's when, in 1968, they institutionalized the Continental Boards of Counselors. You know, I had a kind of rough time finding a statement where the institution is mentioned as an institution. I grew up as a Baha'i thinking that the hands of the cause of God were merely the hands of, not merely, were the hands of the cause of God, special people protecting and promoting the faith. I never really thought of them as an institution until going to the World Center and learning more, and particularly in preparing for this class. The Universal House of Justice does have a letter in the 1990s where it says that the institution of the hands of the cause of God would be developed by the Universal House of Justice during a period when they themselves can help develop the institution of the Continental Boards of Counselor. It's in these papers somewhere. All right, let's see what else I can find to tell you. All right, here's a letter from the Universal House of Justice, quoting a letter of Shoghi Effendi. At present, the exact implication and full significance of the provisions of the Master's will are as yet imperfectly understood, and time will serve to reveal the wisdom and the far-reaching effects of his words. In other writings, the House of Justice says that there are mysteries in the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha. You might say that the institution of the hands of the cause of God existed from 1951, when the Guardian appointed the first contingency, until 2006, when the last hand of the cause of God passed away. We might say that, but then again, it might be a mystery because Shoghi Abdu'l-Baha mentioned them as an institution in 1901. Can we then say that the institution of the Hands of the Cause of God began in 1901 because Abdu'l-Baha put it on paper? Or are we just nitpicking words? But these are some of the things that is the spirit of the faith and not just the letter of the faith. Okay, one of the biggest surprises for me, being slow learning, is the will and testament not appointing. On page 13 of the will and testament, it begins, this body of the hands of the cause of God are under the protection of the guardian. Okay, it's a long paragraph. That's the beginning of the paragraph. He's talking about the Abha kingdom, governments will come and disappear. And the very last sentence, out of nowhere to me, should differences arise, they shall be amicably and conclusively settled by the Supreme Tribunal. I probably read that for years thinking they were referring to the Universal House of Justice. Well, they weren't. There's a paper called the International Court of Arbitration and the Supreme Tribunal. It is explained that they are both the same thing. When you read the International Court of Arbitration and you read the Supreme Tribunal, they are both the same thing. The Supreme Tribunal will be adjudicating all of these worldwide problems between nations. However, it says they will not come into existence until there is a Baha'i state. Now, when are we going to have a Baha'i state? You may remember when he had a class on Ali Naqshbani's book, Towards World Order, he gave the steps that the faith must go through. The first four are just one words: obscurity, repression, emancipation, and recognition. The fifth step is the official acceptance of the faith as a state religion of a nation. So I read that when there's a Baha'i state, will also bring into existence the Supreme Tribunal. Now, the Supreme Tribunal will be made up of selected or elected, qualified, highly talented leaders in every country. Depending upon their population, they will have something like 1 or 2 members. So these non-Baha'is, even, shall we say, the House of Justice says, we don't know exactly how this is all going to happen. Naturally, they don't. It's in the future, and future houses of justice will be able to be divinely guided how to bring in the Supreme Tribunal. There is nothing that says women can't be members of the Supreme Tribunal. The House of Justice has said that. They see nothing that indicates women can't be on this. Now, here's the fun part. The two institutions will merge. The Universal House of Justice which only men can serve on, and will have been perhaps in existence for a couple of centuries. And the Supreme Tribunal from all we have no way of knowing right now how that merge will take place. That's exciting. That's really exciting. Let's see what I have to tell you. Oh, here's that in Todd's world order. When following passing of Shoghi Effendi, the Universal House of Justice decided that it would not legislate to make possible the appointment of future hands of the cause. It became necessary for it to create a new institution appointed by itself to extend into the future the functions of protection of the hands of the cause. With you so develop the institution of the hands that it would nurture the new institution and functions, which would be the Continental Boards of Counselors. Isn't that exciting? Okay. Here's a question. Was the first conclave of the Hands of the Cause of God, which is in this book, and the appointment of 9 hands to serve in the Holy Land, a fulfillment of the provision of the will and testament? In the will and testament, Abdu'l-Baha says that there should be hands of the cause appointed of them to serve in the Holy Land. Now somebody is asking Ali Naqshbandi, was that first contingent of hands a fulfillment of the provisions in the will and testament? This is where you have to see more than one piece of paper. You have to put all this history together. And Ali says, it does not appear to me to be so, because the 9 in the will and testament were to be selected through the process of approving Shoghi Effendi's appointment of his successor. Since Shoghi Effendi didn't have a successor, there were no 9 to verify his choice. So Ali is saying, no, that's not a fulfillment. It never happened. So they are the regular 9 and mentioned in the first conclave. There are 27 hands of the cause of God at the time of Effendi's passing. There were 26 involved in the ministry of the custodians, because Mason Remy, of course, claimed to be the second guardian. There were others who followed Mason Remy. 5 of the members of the National Assembly of France had to cause the NSA to be dissolved because they followed Mason Remy. One of those 5 claimed to be the third guardian. I don't know how many they are now, if they even exist. So I'm unable to tell you anything fresh about the situation of the covenant breakers. I remember when I was the secretary of the local assembly of the city of St. Louis when I was a young Baha'i, I got a letter in the mail that the envelope said, the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is under the second guardian. And I threw it in the trash. I didn't want to open it. And then I was still very, very nervous. I didn't like that letter in my house. So I took it out of the trash and took it outside and threw it in the bin that would be collected by the sanitation department. There was a real sickness in the house with that letter, let alone actually meeting a covenant breaker. That was just paper. Friends, that really is my presentation about the circumstances around the start of the.
Oh, Marianne, somehow you got muted. If you can unmute yourself, please.
Unmute. Is
There
that
you
better?
go. Perfect. Yeah, great.
I apologize for the presentation, flipping through papers and trying to keep this thing in a chronological order.
It was
Um,
wonderful. Thank you for taking the time to even put it in some type of order for us. We're all very appreciative. Everybody now has the opportunity to unmute themselves. And if you have any questions, either wave your hand or feel free to ask your question of Marianne or a comment.
I'll blow a bugle.
Yes, Leighton, please.
First of all, there was a brilliant chronology by our presenter. The book of the Ministry of the Guardians, of the Ministry of the Hands of the Cause during the interregnum, in addition to all the lovely things that Mary presented, for me, it was also a study on the art of consultation by all the hands from diverse countries. And it was amazing how lovingly, frankly, openly, and seriously they express their mind, their views, not only in person, but also those who couldn't be there in writing. And I thought it was sort of a tremendous demonstration of Baha'i consultation.
That's a good point. It's amazing the social connection of these wonderful people. You know, the Universal House of Justice sat with each other for 40 years, some of them, looking at the same faces 3 times a week, maybe longer if there's an emergency. And yet, when one of them came back from holiday, he was greeted by all the others as if they haven't seen him for years. It was so sweet to watch. One of the things I wanted to mention was there came a time in the World Center when Ali Nachivani said we were a community in mourning. It was when there was the Islamic Revolution in 1979. It was a period when we lost 6 hands of the cause of God. Enoch Alinga, who was machine gunned to death in 1979, Dr. Mahajer, 1979, Mr. Baluzzi and Dr. Muschlegel and Mr. Faizi in 1980, and Paul Haney in 1982. He said we were a community in mourning. And so there was an atmosphere of apprehension, but of faith, that the faith would continue. You know, what's going on right now in the Middle East. The hands of Baha'u'llah is hovering over the Baha'is both in Israel and in Iran. You know, Baha'u'llah said, God in his own way will deal, my words, will deal with the events of the future. and I think it's where that quote is, the perversity of mankind will long persist until there shall suddenly appear the limbs of mankind to quake. Then and only then will these things materialize. We also, during that period of mourning, lost a member of the Universal House of Justice, and that would have been Amos Gibson. The sad part of losing Amos was that he was the convener of the Holy Places Department, in which case, for 10 years, he oversaw the construction of the seat of the Universal House of Justice. And yet, when it was dedicated at the World Center with the members of the World Center institutions and staff, he was absent. It was a teary moment. So you can imagine the World Center not being as big as it is now, population wise, that these things struck at our hearts.
Yeah, you mentioned about the current situation of Iran. Baha'u'llah actually says, and I quote, "Ere long will the state of affairs within thee be changed, and the reins of power will fall into the hands of the people." And there's also something very beautiful by Abdul Baha, which I just found. I have to read it for you. Abdul Baha says, "The future of Iran is of the utmost greatness, majesty, and glory, for it is the native land of the Blessed Beauty. All the nations of the earth will turn to and regard Iran with high esteem. Know of a certainty that it will make such progress as to dazzle the eyes of the mighty and the learned throughout the world."
This is God.
Yeah.
You know, I had that series of meetings on crisis, and I quoted The Guardian out of all the books that he wrote, all the times he said, these things will change, but we're going to be part of the change too. Any
Yeah.
other questions?
Yeah. Advent of divine justice. It never gets old.
Yes,
Never
yes.
gets old. And the priceless pearl, you reminded us. Maybe we're going to put that as one of our reading books for Baha'i Chronicles. I think that would be lovely
I
to just
think I mentioned when I
hear
need to
stories.
know
Yeah.
something historically,
Yeah.
I hit two books. I hit the Priceless Pearl and God Passes By.
Yeah.
These
You,
are my two historic books. And now we've got more. Uh, I have a class I'm giving now on the early revelation of Baha'u'llah. That would be his 10 years in Baghdad. And when I was a young Baha'i, I had no clue that we would be getting these tomes of the actual writings of the central figures of the faith. The fact that the 5-year plan in 1970s produced the World Center goals of the selections from the writings of the Bab, selections from the writings of Abdul Baha, and tablets of Baha'u'llah revealed after the Kitabi Akdas. More recently, in this century, we've got all these precious tablets translated during Baha'u'llah's 10 years of concealment before he made his declaration. I love history of this faith.
yeah. Okay, friends, if there are no more questions, I want to really just emphasize thank you from the bottom of my heart, of our hearts, Marianne, that you continue to be such a teacher, such a light, to share your wisdom, your experience, and your the whole time that you were in Haifa. We need to bottle it, and thank you for allowing us to just even share little glimpses of it. And I will be reaching out more. Maybe when we do Priceless Pearl, you can, be with us for that, because that would be lovely, because you would have firsthand stories of Ruhiya Khanum, which we would adore and cherish. And
Now,
friends,
I have to tell you, one of the things Amata Baha Ruhiya Khanum said, She said, if I'm anything, I'm loyal to my friends. The problem for me is, how do you account that you're a friend of Rahia Khanum's? I left the World Center at the end of 1984. My last letter that I got was from Rahia Khanum, who was in the Pacific dedicating the house of worship in Samoa. In 1993, almost 10 years from my leaving the World Center, she sent me a copy of this book inscribed. We kept up a friendship, if I can use that term, with such a precious lady, even after I left the World Center. If one thing she is, she's loyal to her friends on top of everything else she is. Yes, I have a lot to say.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's beautiful. Just to remind the friends, we do have our next class. It'll be August 14th, and it is by Hand of the Cause of God, Zikrullah Khadem's daughter, Dr. Khadem Khodadad, and that book is The Dynamics of Growth. She's an amazing, extraordinary writer, scientist, so I think it would be very fascinating for us all to be a part of that, and she actually was with Shoke Effendi too. So she's going to join every session. So please come. It'll be our book club, and we look forward to having all of you with us. Thank you, Alapa, beautiful Marianne. Much love. Thank you all.
Oh,
you.
God.
Hello, Pa.
Nice seeing you all. Nice seeing you all.
Mhm.
Same here.